this is gonna be as fast of a video as I can make that is going to show you how to throw on the pottery wheel from start to finish. I'll show you the techniques that I use in my class, and again, kind of anything that works for you, just kind of make it work. Take these tips, try to do these steps, but make any modifications you think that you need. So to start off with, you're gonna start off with a piece of clay. I like to start off with a chunk of clay that is new, not recycled, and I'm gonna be showing you how to throw with white clay. We want to wedge it into sort of like a nugget-like shape. We wanna make sure that it's even all the way around and that the bottom is flat. There are no little swirlies in the bottom. Okay, so you wanna wedge that up. A good amount of clay to start with is between 1.5 pounds and 2 pounds, okay? What you have to do after that is set up your wheel. So to set up your wheel, everyone has one of these black boards. There are 2 holes in it. They're gonna line up with screws on your pottery wheel. We're gonna line those up. At the end, it's really important that we wash everything completely. And then one thing we've learned is do not put this back on tight when you've washed off your piece. We don't want water to sit in between the black top and the base of the wheel. It'll rust. Then you have two trays that are gonna catch all of the water and slip from your wheel throwing experience. And you're gonna start with the bigger one, and that one goes away from you. And we're gonna take it and slide it underneath the wheel. So this part will slide underneath the wheel. You have to kind of shimmy it on until it can't go any further. And then we take this one and we hook up the holes underneath, and that one just snaps into place, okay? You might not be able to see it in the video, but along the right-hand side of the wheel, there is one switch to turn the wheel on and a pedal. And the pedals are nice because you can push it down however fast you want and leave it, and it will go. You don't have to keep your foot on it. There is also a switch here that will switch the direction of the wheel. If you are right-handed like I am, you want your wheel to go counterclockwise. If you are left-handed, we would want the wheel to go the opposite direction, okay? Also to throw, I need a bucket of water. I'm gonna put that off to the side so it doesn't block the view. And then I need my kit of tools. There should be a kit on every wheel. I'll keep that off to the side as well. Okay, so to throw on the wheel, there really are 7 steps. So step number 1 is getting your wedged piece of clay down on the wheel. So I'm gonna use the round sponge that's in my bucket, and I'm gonna clean off this top of this wheel. I wanna wet it a little bit. I don't want it to be soaking wet. If it is, your clay will not stick. Then I'm also gonna take this wedged piece of clay, again, wet the bottom a little bit. I don't want it to be super soaking wet. And I have the wheel going at about medium speed. I can see where the center is, and I'm gonna take and I'm just going to plop that down, okay? Once I plop that down, that should be on there really nice and tight. You're gonna find if it's not on there, it's gonna pop off after a while, and then what you have to do is clean off your wheel, clean off the bottom of that clay, and just try to get it to stick again. So there's a fine line between not throwing it hard enough, and sometimes if you toss it down too hard, it won't stick also, okay? So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is the most important step. That is called centering the wheel, or excuse me, centering the clay. And in order to do that, well, if you don't center the clay, you will not be able to make anything, I promise you. Sometimes people try to make things with clay that is not centered, and it just doesn't work, okay? So what I'm gonna do, you saw me grab some water to start, and then anytime you're doing anything on the wheel, you wanna make sure your elbows are planted and your hands are really strong. You can see how the clay just kind of takes charge. So if I'm not pushing very hard, I'm not really doing anything. The clay is just kind of moving my hands around. So you have to grip harder than you would think you would. And so to center the clay, I like to start off with a pretty fast wheel, and I like to take both of my hands and just sort of squeeze inward, okay? Once I squeeze in like that, then I'm going to form this into a cone. And I'm gonna bring it up. And you can see I'm applying most of the pressure with the palms of my hands. If I use the blades of my hands here, and if I press too hard with that, I'm gonna end up losing a chunk, which is pretty common, okay? So I'm forming it up into this cone shape. Again, being careful not to squeeze too hard that the top of it pops off. Okay. My wheel is going pretty fast. And then the next part is, I think, the most important part of centering, where I'm gonna use my right hand. Again, you can feel this out how you need to, and I'm gonna push down with my right hand. Now, if I just push down like this, it's gonna start to get really wobbly, okay? So you have to have a guide hand for it. I'm gonna bring that back up into the cone again. Again, every time I feel like the clay starts to drag on my hands, I need to add more water to it. So I'm gonna push down with this hand. With this hand, I'm gonna form a C. So I'm pushing and I'm forming a C, and that is giving myself a little mold for the clay to go into. Okay, so I'm gonna push straight down, and I'm forming a C with my left hand. Now see how my elbow is planted? My hands are strong. You have to be much stronger than you would think you would need to be to throw on the wheel. And I'm gonna push down. And after that, if you can see, my clay still has a little bit of a wiggle, a little wobble to it, okay? And that's not a centered piece of clay. A centered piece of clay would not have that wobble. So I'm gonna go back, and again, I'm gonna form it into a cone again. I'm doing this on the right and the left side of the clay, so if this is a clock face, I'm doing it at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and I'm pushing down. Now centering is one of those things that you kind of just have to get by feel. You'll be able to feel and tell if it is a centered piece of clay or not. And sometimes people get really excited and think it's centered, and it is not. It took me, I would say, to be honest, probably like 6 hours of throwing on the pottery wheel to be able to get it centered. So don't expect to get this on your first try, okay? Once you get it, you get it. All right, so that is nice and centered now. It's sort of a globe, a rounded dome of clay. I'm gonna take and clean my wheel. You don't wanna get in the habit of throwing with a dirty wheel. You're gonna produce a lot of slip, and sometimes that slip can cause your piece to be thrown off. So I always like to clean off my piece in between steps, okay? So step 1 is getting it to stick on the wheel. Step 2 is getting it centered, which mine is. Step 3 is called opening the clay, okay? And to open the clay, that's a fun one to do. You're gonna again put water on it, and I'm gonna take both of my thumbs, and again at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, if this was a clock face, I'm going to push straight down, and I'm gonna slow down my wheel a tiny bit. I don't want it to be going super, super fast. My clay's starting to drag, so I'll add some more water. And I'm just gonna push straight down. If you have long nails, this might be a little challenging. You don't wanna push all the way down to the bottom. If you do that, then your piece will have a hole in the bottom of it. Clean off my hands a little bit here. And then what I'll do is I'm gonna stop my wheel. I'm gonna take my needle tool and stick it to the bottom. And then I'll put my finger up against the bottom of my piece. And then I'll come out, and looks like that is how deep the base of my piece is. That's a little too thick for me, so I'm gonna go back in, and I'm gonna push down just a little bit further, okay? So that's step 3. Step number 4 is going to be setting the base. And this is an important step. All the steps are important. If you don't follow them, you might make something, but it might not be functional, or it might not look as good as it could, okay? So this is a hard step for people to comprehend. So what I'm gonna do with my right hand is I'm going to support the clay on the outside, okay? If I were to just do something on the inside without supporting the outside, it's gonna get thrown off, and once it gets thrown off center, it's really hard to do anything else with it. So my right hand is my support hand. My left hand, I do this with my middle finger, but do whatever works for you. And all you're gonna do, I'll kind of show you, is you're gonna start in the middle of the clay, or the middle of your piece. You're gonna push down on the bottom, and you're gonna run your hand or your finger to the right and back to the center. Seems simple, but it can be kind of tricky. And what this is gonna do is it's going to establish how wide my piece is gonna be. So you can see how the clay is widening up a little bit. So if I had a lot of clay on the wheel, and if I wanted to make something as wide as the wheel, I would push out all the way to the outside, okay? So I push outward, and now I have to go back, and I wanna pretend I'm drawing a straight line from the center of my pot to the outside. Sometimes some extra clay comes up. That's pretty common. So again, I'm just going to the right straight and to the back straight. So like I said, this is doing two things. This is establishing how wide the base of my piece is going to be, and it's also compressing the clay on the bottom of my piece. It's really common for your pieces to develop cracks if you forget this step. I usually like to go back and forth maybe about 3 times. Sometimes it makes kind of a fun spirally pattern. We'll give that a shot. Okay, once we do that, now I'm in between steps, so I want to take some time just to clean off my wheel, make sure there isn't any gunk. And these next 2 steps are the most rewarding because that's when you're going to see your piece grow. So you might look at this now, and I don't know if that video angle, if you can see the inside of my piece or not, but it looks pretty cute. It looks like it could be maybe a vase or something like that. But if we were to cut this in half, it's nice and thin on top, but this part right here is really, really thick, and we don't want that. We don't want a thick piece, especially if you're making something like a mug. This would just be ultimately too heavy, okay? So what we're gonna do now are called pulls, okay? And the pull essentially is taking this thick clay from the bottom and pulling it upward. So I'll clean off my wheel here. Before every pull that I do, I start with my thumb. I use the back of my thumbnail, and I do this, if this were a clock, I do this at 4 o'clock, and I create a little notch on the bottom of my piece. So you can see from the side how it kind of curves in at the bottom, okay? Then I'm going to take my right hand. First I'll get my clay nice and wet. I like to do this with a wet sponge in my hand so it's handy. Get it? I'm gonna take my hand here. My thumb is gonna go on the outside underneath that lip, and my fingers will go inside, okay? I'm gonna do this, if this is a clock, at 6 o'clock, so pointing directly towards me. And I wanna make sure I don't let the wheel take my hand. You wanna keep your hand still and let the wheel spinning do the work for you. My left hand is gonna support my wrist because this is kind of hard to do. My wheel is going medium speed, and I'm just squeezing a little bit. And as I squeeze, I'm pulling the clay upward. And you can see it kind of starts to stretch upward, get a little bit taller. Now we want to do the pull all in one motion. If for some reason you have to stop, like I just had to stop there, and the reason is my clay is starting to get dry. And you don't want to be doing pulls if your clay is dry. So I'm going to add some more water on. I'm going to go right back to where I started. You can see that little lip of clay there. So my thumb is going to go under that lip, and I'm going to continue to pull upwards. And I want to pull all the way through, but as you get to the top, you have to ease up on the pressure a little bit. If you pinch really hard at the top, you're gonna maybe poke a hole in the top of your piece, okay? So that was pull number 1. You can see how my sides got taller and more even. Now after every pull, we have to do what's called compressing the rim. So I'm gonna take my pincher fingers, my thumb and my pointer finger, and I'm going to pinch the rim, and then I'm going to take the back of my thumb and just push down a little bit. This is compressing the clay, and if my edge isn't even, that might help a little bit. I have a lot of clay sitting, or a lot of water, sitting inside of my piece, so I want to take that out to start, and I'm just going to clean up the sides. So that was my first pull. The first pull is the only pull that you're going to do with one hand at 6 o'clock. Okay? Every other pull after that, and looking at this piece, I'm probably going to need 2 or 3 more. So every other pull after that, I'm going to do like this. So I'm going to start with my notch on the bottom. I always want to do that, creating a little spot for my fingers to go. And then I'm going to get my clay nice and wet. And then this one is going to look different. So I'm going to take my outside hand, put it underneath that notch of clay. Okay? Then I'm going to take my inside hand, so my outside hand is my right hand, my inside hand is my left, and I'm going to go inside of my piece. My fingers are lined up like this. There's just a project. My piece that's on the wheel is inside of them. And I'm going to take, my outside hand is always staying underneath that lip. I'm not pushing too hard. If you push too hard and try to make this pull go really fast, you're going to end up creating a weak spot. And you can see how that little notch of clay is just coming upwards. I'm always keeping my hand underneath it. I stopped that pull because my clay got a little dry. My hand started to drag. So I'm gonna go back to the same spot where I stopped, and again, I'm just gonna follow it up. You have to be patient, and you wanna pull all the way through to the top. Sometimes people say you shouldn't take a breath while you're pulling because you wanna do it all in one fluid motion. Again, as I get up towards the top, I'm gonna ease up on the pressure a little bit, and I'm gonna have some extra clay that comes up, which is fine, that just happens, okay? Now my pull is done, so I need to compress the clay on top, and then I need to clean off my piece and the wheel. I'm gonna do one more pull like that, and you'll be able to feel if your piece is too thick, you might need 3 or 4 pulls, but this should be good for me. I'm gonna take my thumb, make my notch again, just to repeat some instruction. We'll get it nice and wet. My outside hand is gonna go under the lip, and I'm going to pull straight up. Now this is gonna be a cylinder, so I might later on go and attach a handle to this and turn this into a mug. If you are gonna be throwing a bowl, you're gonna go about things a little bit differently, but let's start with a cylinder, just to get your feet wet a little bit. Now after my pull, I have to compress the clay on top, okay? Now I'm gonna clean this off. So just to repeat what got me to this stage, step 1 was getting my clay to stick to the piece. Step 2 was centering. Step 3 was opening the clay, where I pushed my thumbs in to create that opening. Step 4 was establishing the base, where I drew a straight line from the center to the right and back to the center. Step 4 was my first pull, which was at 6 o'clock, going straight up. And step 5 is my additional pulls, is just what I call it, which are my 2-handed pulls, and I did 2 of them, okay? Step 6 is going to be shaping, if you're interested in shaping your piece at all. So you saw already as I was talking, I went through and cleaned off any additional moisture. This is going to be a mug, so I want to make sure that the lip is nice and rounded. You don't want to drink off of anything that has a jagged edge. And then I'm going to use my wooden rib to shape the inside of my piece. And I like the shape that it is already. I don't want to do too much to it. So what I might do is take my hand on the center, and I'm going to have my wheel going slow. And I might push outward a little bit to give my piece a little bit of a belly. And then I might use the top, and notice how I got this tool wet. I might use the top and have the top edge sort of curve a little bit. But I don't need to do too much in terms of shaping because I like the shape that this is taken. Sometimes people will use their rib to kind of clean off some extra clay. See, I've got some excess clay that comes off on that rib. Then, one of the last things I'm going to do once I have it shaped, so I'm going to take this tool right here, I'm going to use the pointy end. Again, I'm going to do this at about 4 o'clock, and I'm going to push that pointy end in because the thickest part of my piece is going to be the base. You don't want it to be super thin down there because if this is going to be a mug, you want it to be able to sit straight and not move around, not tip over. But I want to trim a little bit of that extra clay off so it's not super heavy, okay? So that gives me a nice shape on the bottom as well. I'm going to go through with my sponge one more time and make sure that there isn't any standing water inside. That it's about as clean as it can be. Letting the wheel kind of twist around and do the work for me. And then I'm going to take my wire cutter, twist it around my hands, bring it away from me, and I'm going to pull it towards me, but I'm going to pull it along the bottom, and then I'm going to stop my wheel. So I just pulled it straight across. Okay. Now, when I pick this up, if I pick it up on the sides, I'm going to kind of ruin all my hard work. So I'm just going to push from the bottom, rotate it as it comes off, and then voila, I've got my nice little cylinder. Really symmetrical, nicely done. After this dries and gets leather hard, I can trim the bottom if I'd like, which will be a whole nother video, and then I could add a handle to it. Okay, good luck, happy throwing.